Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. I'm across the road from the Royal Geographical Society, and there you can see a statue of Livingstone. It's got that single word, as though he needs no introduction. So who was Dr. David Livingstone? Well, he was born in the United Kingdom, and he grew up in a town called Blantyre in Scotland. His family were proletarians, so he had to leave school very early and work in a factory, work incredibly long hours. However, he was a child of most precocious intelligence, and he was incredibly industrious as well. So despite working many hours in grim conditions in a mill, he still devoted himself to study. And it was an extraordinary achievement that he was able to attend medical school despite having very little money indeed. He was also fired by his Christian faith. He was of the Protestant denomination, like most people in Scotland at the time. However, he did not belong to the established church there, that's the Church of Scotland, nor was he an Episcopalian. He belonged to one of the minor Protestant churches there. And he managed to qualify as a doctor, which was no mean feat. Bearing in mind, people didn't come from middle-class families or upper-class families. Going to university was almost impossible in the early 19th century. And he wanted to go to Africa to evangelize. So the London Missionary Society took him on, and he went out there to spread the good news. And there he was, preaching the gospel. He was in South Africa. He moved up to what we now call Zambia and Zimbabwe, Malawi. He traveled around there a lot, and indeed he won many souls for Christ, as he would say. And that's why some people still consider the denomination to be London Missionary Society. He befriended many of the local chieftains, and he had the good book translated into local languages. They're mostly Bantu languages. Slavery was a major problem at the time, and there were slavers from the east coast of Africa who would penetrate deep into the hinterland and abduct people, take them off to the Indian Ocean coast, and force people to toil in dreadful conditions, sometimes ship them to the Arabian Peninsula and elsewhere, where these people would be forced to work in servitude and suffer the most horrific depredations, floggings, so forth, rape, every crime you can imagine. So he campaigned vigorously against slavery. The British Empire had entered its ethical period, having abolished slavery in 1837, and sought to exterminate this cruel vice of slavery throughout the globe. And he believed that commerce needed to replace slavery, so that even those who were pro-slavery, if they couldn't be militarily defeated, they could be persuaded to see that there were more honourable routes to prosperity. Anyway, he was missing in the interior of Africa for a while. A British-American adventurer and journalist, Henry Morgan Stanley, was commissioned by his US newspaper to find him. So he hired himself, hundreds of porters, and went on an expedition deep into the interior of Africa. He also had to cooperate with slavers, Henry Morgan Stanley. That wasn't his real name. Stanley, he was born in the United Kingdom. He was born out of wedlock, considered a disgrace at the time. Suffered discrimination. I won't go into Stanley too much, but he moved to the United States. He fought in the Confederate Army. He was pro-slavery, actually. But anyway, he did finally come along, and there were very few white men hundreds of miles from the coast, and he saw this elderly white, and he said, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume?" Yes, indeed, it was him. Dr. Livingstone was fatally ill. He then died, and I believe it was his heart was removed from his corpse because his body couldn't be preserved. His heart was taken back to the United Kingdom. So he'd been adulated by the British public long before this. He'd given a famous oration in the Senate House of Cambridge University some years before, encouraging people to evangelize for the Christian faith in other continents. So he was a Victorian Christian hero, and he was someone who was exalted by most of British society at the time. Indeed, there's still a town in Zambia named Livingstone in his honor. There's a city near there called Blantyre, as in Livingstone's hometown. These days, people tend to take a more nuanced view of him, see him as a cultural imperialist and what was wrong with African animism and so on, that he was really the vanguard of the British Empire, which many people contend to be a bad thing. So the Royal Geographical Society honoured him, though he didn't actually work for them. So by the way, it's well worth visiting this building. It sometimes has expeditions. Livingstone married Miss Moffat, the daughter of another missionary. He had 6 children with her, 2 of whom predeceased him. And he's no relation to Red Ken Livingstone either. So that's enough about Dr. Livingstone.